Pierce Brosnan's last James Bond movie, Die Another Day, was a box office bomb and a disappointing farewell, but without it we never would have got Daniel Craig's new iteration of the character. It has been argued by many commentators that Brosnan's James Bond movies had potential but never did him justice. Brosnan's first 007 movie, GoldenEye, was rated 80% positive on Rotten Tomatoes, and virtually every aspect was praised, setting the bar high. While Brosnan's next two Bond movies were considered middling entries, Die Another Day was described as ludicrous on a different level, prompting a total James Bond reboot. When Daniel Craig was announced as the seventh actor to play James Bond, there was initial backlash. The most minor complaints rejected a blonde Bond, while the more credible pointed out that Craig was mostly known for gritty action movies and playing criminals or soldiers, not the sophisticated, more subtle character that James Bond has always been. However, Craig's James Bond era has been regarded as one of the best of all time, and though Craig's franchise reboot could not be further from Die Another Day, it could not have happened without it. Why Die Another Day failed? Daniel Craig took James Bond back in time, in a good way. James Bond, Pierce Brosnan, opens the door to his invisible car in Die Another Day. Die Another Day represented a radical departure from what had previously been the Brosnan era's strengths. GoldenEye introduced Brosnan's Bond with a heart-stopping damn jump, followed by Tina Turner's dramatic GoldenEye theme. By contrast, Die Another Day juxtaposes a graphic scene of torture with Madonna's jarring electronic track. It was a sign of the movie to come, which tried and failed to bring modernity to the franchise through outlandish technology. Although director Lee Tamahori defended James Bond's use of gadgets, Die Another Day's gadgets appeared closer to science fiction than Bond. In a major improvement, Casino Royale's opening scene reset James Bond for the Daniel Craig era, resembling a black-and-white film noir before exploding into Chris Cornell's theme song. Casino Royale's plot provides a safety net for any mistakes. Craig's Bond has just received 00 status. He is new to being 007, and Casino Royale reintroduced James Bond tropes like martinis with Bond discovering them for the first time. Taking Bond back in time made this new portrayal believable and underlined the fact that this movie would be a total departure from the hyperfuturistic themes that made Die Another Day fail. Daniel Craig's James Bond era was a reaction to Die Another Day's failure. One key scene failed in Die Another Day, but worked in Casino Royale. Daniel Craig plays James Bond in Casino Royale's infamous torture scene. The James Bond franchise can be a little formulaic, but the right writers and cast can make an overdone concept feel new. Die Another Day's main fault was amplifying the core 007 features while leaving characterization, plot, and dialogue as secondary considerations. This left Die Another Day feeling like a caricature of James Bond, in a different genre, and with none of Brosnan's charm and personality. Stripping the James Bond franchise back to basics and taking it in a completely different direction with an unexpected actor was the only way to avoid James Bond movies continuing into self-parody. Die Another Day's uncharacteristically gritty torture scene did not suit Brosnan's Bond, whose strength was in his sophistication and comedic timing, but introduced the idea that James Bond could find himself in genuinely disturbing situations. A better actor for a scene like this was Craig, and Casino Royale's torture scene, in which James Bond is brutally beaten with a knotted rope, yet still manages to remain in control, is a different way of showing his strength. This relative darkness that defined Craig's James Bond era was the response needed to reboot the 007 franchise after Die Another Day's failure. What the next James Bond movie can learn from Die Another Day? The next Bond movie must embrace the individuality of the actor playing 007. Bangs, explosions, and gadgets can make a fun movie, but not necessarily a great movie, and prioritizing effects over characterization, as Die Another Day did, is a recipe for disaster. Die Another Day appeared to assume that a James Bond movie would remain successful with the same formula, despite Brosnan's previous Bond movies being criticized for precisely this approach. The next James Bond movie must focus on continuing the development of James Bond as a character, and not be afraid to break with tradition and embrace the attributes that the new Bond actor will bring to the 007 franchise.